Hey, y'all. Welcome to the Reckless Optimist podcast. My name is Megan. I'm a family nurse practitioner with a deep passion for mental health. On this show, we showcase guests who have shown tenacity, grit, mental strength, and who embody the word resilience. A quick disclaimer before we start. This show is not a substitute for mental diagnosis or treatment. We do recommend that if you're struggling with your own emotional well-being, you see a mental health provider. I'm so excited that you guys are here. Let's get into it. Hey, everyone. Today on the podcast, we have Kayla. Kayla and I actually know each other through growing up in the same county. Shout out to Rabun County, one of the most beautiful places in the whole world. It's a small little county in Northeast Georgia. It's God's country. And if you've never been, I highly recommend visiting. It is just absolutely beautiful. So she shares her story tonight. It is a wild ride, many twists and turns. She was an active addiction very young, got pregnant when she was young, was eventually homeless, incarcerated, had lost everything, and a probation officer that came into her life completely changed the trajectory of her life. And her story is one of hope. It's a beautiful story of resilience, and I know you guys are going to love it. So let's get into it. Hey, everyone. Help me welcome Kayla to the podcast.
Hi.
I'm so excited that you're here. Where are you coming in from?
So I'm actually coming in from Hollywood, Florida. I'm actually in a recovery community center, but it is just after hours right now.
I know. Before we jumped on, I was talking about how much I loved your background. And what does it say behind you?
It says, "Together we rise."
Okay. And what do you do at the recovery center?
So I'm a certified recovery peer specialist. I'm the program director here. So I really run all different types of programs, youth programming, adult programming, family programming, to support individuals that have mental health and or substance use. We are like boots on the ground. We serve the indigent population, people that typically can't afford insurance, and we work hand in hand with them to really meet their recovery goals, build recovery capital, get the resources and supports necessary for them to enter into a journey of wellness and healing. And a lot of the time it's family restoration, because we have a child welfare team. We're also in the jails, and we work in the high schools with youth on prevention and intervention.
Sounds like you're doing some really interesting, important work. You know, I love how you said boots on the ground. Like, that's awesome. So me and you know each other through mutual friends. Our mutual friend is my girl, Nikki. I call her Sissy. She has been my best friend since I was 14. We've grown up together. And you guys share an ex-husband, correct?
Yes. Well, he's her ex-husband and he's my future husband.
Yes.
And so that's our common denominator. And she's pretty amazing. And so is her and Mark's daughter, who I got the opportunity to meet and getting to know. And just a beautiful, beautiful young lady.
Yeah.
Just like my mama.
Yes, Nikki texted me about you and how awesome you were and how I had to have you on my show. So I'm so excited to hear your story, but we're going to start our episode out with a quote like we do each time. And the quote I have for your episode is by Michelle C. Clark, who is an author and a motivational speaker. He also has his own podcast called After You Fail. So the quote goes, "You've worked too hard to let a season of darkness convince you that there's no light at the end of the tunnel." What does that make you feel?
So when I think about it, like now in terms of recovery, I feel that there's never not any hope. When I look at like life and the difficulties and the things that I've overcome, I can stand here today and be like, I'm actually grateful for these experiences. Not that I would want to like go through them all over again, but that these experiences that I've had in life have actually enabled me to become who I am in life. And so for me, when I look at difficulties and struggles and even some of the darker seasons of my life, I think that those are very tied to my growth and my healing journey. And so I look at the light at the end of the tunnel isn't just like the light ahead, but it's also the light that I carry within myself now today. So I'm never in fear for difficult seasons of life, because I often know that's what leads to new growth.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love how you talked about hope, because that's what I thought of when I read this quote. Hope was the word that came up for me. And I don't have a lot of tattoos, but I have one on the side of my chest that says "For the Hope of It All." And it's actually from a Taylor Swift song, August. And yeah, hope is what has got me through everything. I approach everything in life with a risk-benefit ratio, and there's little risk to having hope. There's little risk to having a hopeful attitude when you approach things, but potentially a great benefit. So I'm a big fan of hope and a big fan of this quote. I love how you said, you know, the light at the end of the tunnel, but also the light inside you. I feel that as well. And I feel that light in me is growing the further and further I go in recovery. So
Awesome.
We're going to get into your story. So wherever you feel comfortable, just take us back.
Awesome. I was born in South Florida, Miami. My parents got divorced when I was really young. Both of them remarried. When I look at any and every family across the world, there's levels of dysfunction because where there are humans, there is flaws. And typically, if there hasn't been healing, sometimes that healing or sometimes those issues kind of pass down generationally. And so my family line, there's definitely history of substance use. There's history of mental health challenges. There has definitely been challenges with parenting styles and all of these different things. I don't hold those things against my family because today I've found healing, and I think that sometimes we do the best that we can, and when we have the opportunity to know better, we can do better. And so I look at it as like, man, by the grace of God, there go I. And so because I got the opportunity to know better, I can do better. Anyways, just so that's like a little bit of the history there. But I moved to Rabun County, Georgia, and that's actually where I met our common denominator, Mark's. I moved there when I was about 14 years old. And I think like, in my adolescence, like looking back, I definitely could see like the offset of mental health challenges and struggles. When I was very young, I started to have like suicidal thoughts. I was very extremely insecure. I would feel anxious. And some of these things too are just like the normal process of adolescence, right? Like we are exploring who we are. We're trying to figure out like where we fit in the world. If there's things that aren't going right at home, sometimes that impacts us. And if we haven't learned the tools to really cope with those things, we find ways to do that, right? And so with me having a family lineage and a history of substance use background and mental health challenges, a lot of my coping ended up like faltering into substances and things that weren't as healthy for myself. And so from a very young age, I found myself starting to use different types of substances, experimenting. And when I started to smoke weed and drink a little bit and these things, I actually loved the way that it made me feel because it made me feel different than how I was feeling in those moments. And some of that was just adolescence, right? It's just going through my teenage years. I just didn't realize that when my cravings or my desire to want to continue to explore substances was maybe a little bit different than the average person. So anyways, that started happening before I moved. And so like when I moved to Georgia, I actually moved because I wanted to live with my father. And, my parents' divorce was really hard on me in the sense that I always felt like I wanted the fatherly love and like really sought after that male figure in my life. And now looking back, I could see like how I put a lot of like expectation on that. And I think that sometimes like our father is like the first kind of, example of like love. And so, which puts a lot of expectation on dads, because it's like if they don't get it right, sometimes that's where like, young girls have like challenges, and like it shows up in their relationships. I'm super grateful today because I have a relationship with God, I have a relationship with Christ. So it's like no human has to get it right in my life because God got it right in my life. But at this point in my life, I didn't know God. I didn't have a lot of the knowledge and the insight that I have today. And so I think that one of my first substances, my first drugs was boys wanting to be loved, wanting to be wanted, wanting to just feel like somebody is going to love me. And it was that emotional need. And I think also like the physical need of having somebody. And so that in itself can be a danger too, right? When you think about it, because then we put a lot into a person. And oftentimes I see it with like youth is they're putting relationships as like their gods. And it's just like this becomes this obsession and it's all about this relationship. And so these are just some of the patterns that I saw, like looking back, I have a lot of insight into like where I struggled and probably like where like the trajectory of my life went, So when I moved to Georgia with this kind of like idea that was going to like fix everything, which it's funny because I constantly thought like a geographical change would kind of like just make things better. And in the moment it did, but it didn't like last long. And the reason being is because a lot of the issues that I was having in my adolescence were more like internal stuff and things that I needed to actually heal from and process and understand better and learn how to cope with and how to just manage as a young adolescent growing up. But I didn't know how to do that. And I had a lot of really big feelings. I'm a very deep feeler. And that's just like something something that I've always been. And so I have a lot of empathy and I tend to just feel things deeper. And so that was a struggle too for me, because when I would have these big feelings and I didn't know what to do with them, I wanted to escape them. And so there was different types of outlets as a young person that I took on to try to escape my feelings. I've ventured into self-harming because I was trying to deal with the emotional pain. I used substances, relationships. It's just all of these different things to just fill this need and this void that was inside of me to get me out of myself. And none of those things worked well, for me. But I was trying to figure it out. And I don't feel at the time when I was in my adolescence that I really was willing to have conversations, or that I had mentors in my life to like guide me on the right path. I was quite rebellious. So when I moved to Georgia, I thought everything was going to be this picturesque, perfect type of situation, I guess. And it kind of didn't end up being what I wanted it to be. It actually ended up being quite the opposite. And so my journey into addiction and into just like a lot of like difficulties and incarceration really took off like through living in Rabun County. And it wasn't Rabun County, it was just that I moved into a place and ended up, finding trouble. And that was really what it was. And I had friendships with people that also were struggling. I was attracted to a lot of brokenness because I myself was broken. We're always seeking to figure out like where is it that we belong. And so like when you see that a person that's like struggling, they're going to tend to go to the other people that are struggling. And it's because we maybe feel less judged, or those people are doing the same things we're doing and we can do those things together and whatnot. So I ended up actually living on my own at the age of 16. So there was some family drama and my dad ended up leaving, and I asked him if I could stay in Georgia and pretty much told him like, please, I'm happy here. I don't want to go back to Florida. And so he agreed to that. Whether it was the right decision or not, it's what happened. And so I kind of like had to grow up pretty quickly because I was now like really not under any like adult authority. And at this point I was very rebellious anyways, because I think when you're a teenager, you kind of get that like F the world kind of mentality. And if you've been hurt and you don't have the trust, I was the type of person who couldn't tell me nothing. I was grown and the whole nine, And when I look back now, I'm like, man, I was just so lost and very desperate for love and desperate to belong. But I did want to grow up, and I wanted to grow up quickly. A lot of my traumas that I experienced began to shape a lot of my views and my perspectives. And because those traumas hadn't been healed, they began to show up and manifest in a lot of my decisions and my behaviors. And I obviously didn't know that at the time. When you're a teenager, you cannot put those things together. You're just kind of like flying by the seat of your pants, and oftentimes we're so mistaken on the trajectory of things. We don't realize all of these decisions that we're making actually are costing us something down the road. Because I always tell people, like, I never picked up substances and said, hey, in 10 years, I want to be completely homeless. I want to have lost custody of a child that I had at 18 years old. I want to be like completely wrecked and broken. And so it's just more so to just be like cautious, thinking about like when we're making decisions, like there's always like a consequence or an effect that comes from those decisions, but you don't understand that when you're a kid. So I actually met Mark, who is now my fiance, and we're getting married, but I met him when I was 17, and I met him kind of in one of those weird situations, I guess. I was staying with someone. It was like a party house type of ordeal, and he came in and we just kind of hung out, and I liked him and we ended up dating. But we were both so caught up in addiction. We were both so lost and broken. You're taking a tornado and a volcano and bringing them together to try to have a relationship. It's just chaos. And I definitely made him my God. I was doing this before it was even him. It was just like every relationship, it was like that, because I just wanted love. And so when I look back at who I was back then, I didn't know who I was. And I was just trying to find my identity in anything and everything. And so oftentimes it would get caught up in a relationship. And so through me and Mark's relationship, I ended up pregnant at 17. The lifestyle and what it brings and breaking the law. And Mark ended up going to prison when I found out I was pregnant. And so I actually had no idea I was pregnant, and I was in a car accident on graduation night. I was not It was not me that was able to graduate because I had missed so much school because of my addiction. And so now I'm 17 and I'm pregnant and I have nothing. I don't even have a home. I don't have a boyfriend because he's locked up. I don't have anything. But I always say when I found out I was pregnant, I just knew deep in my soul that I was supposed to have this baby. And somehow, some way, this baby was going to be what saves me. And for me now, looking back, that was a lot to put on my son, because I don't believe that any human can really like save you, except for Christ. And so at the time, I thought this is going to be the love that I've always wanted. I'm going to love my baby and my baby is going to love me. And it is going to be like everything that I could have ever hoped for and dreamed of in a parent and like all this stuff. So I had all of these high hopes. The issue was I had not done any healing, and you can't impart what you don't possess. And at this point, I was still so broken. And so I'm this child that has just come out of like this most traumatic lifestyle of like drug addiction and drug dealing and just craziness, okay? And now I'm all of a sudden pregnant, and that's supposed to be the transformation. I was still extremely young. All of my friends are going to college, right? They're all like doing like what 18-year-olds should be doing, and I'm bringing in a child, and I'm a mom, and now I have to like not just provide for myself, I have to provide for him, and I have to start like thinking about my life, all of that, including the fact that I was told I couldn't graduate, so I got kicked out of high school. So it's like all of these things that I'm facing at such a young age. And so I will say, like, through the willpower of just knowing that I was pregnant, I completely stopped doing all drugs. I had the most beautiful pregnancy. I gave birth to a beautiful, healthy boy. And I did all those things alone because, again, Mark was like going to prison. But it was like super hopeful, you know, that word hope. And I just like wanted to like be the best that I could for him. And so like in that time, I went and got my GED. I like took the testing. I was saving up money. I was working. I was able to get a vehicle. My dad had moved back to Georgia and he allowed me to like stay with him for a little while I was getting up on my feet. And so I did these things out of willpower because I just always wanted to be like a good mom, even though it was a blessing that was like probably too soon, you know, and like God saw fit that I was going to have a child essentially. But like I said, because there hadn't been any change and any healing and all these things, all of my demons that I had not worked through started to come up again, and they started to really be dealing with me. And so, you know, being a young mom has its challenges in itself because everything that people at your age are doing is partying, going to school, figuring out their life, while I have like all of these responsibilities. And so for me, I started to want to give off the responsibility of my son and have babysitters so that I can live my life and still be young. And so for a few years, I really white knuckled and struggled, and I would have my ups and downs where I'd be like partying really hard. I'm like, well, I'm just drinking. I'm not doing hardcore drugs. But then I'm drinking till oblivion where I'm blackout. I'm waking up in the hospital. It's not normal, right? It's just that any time that I would try to like moderate or bring down my substances, it would just always end up leading towards progression. And it's like my brain and my mind operated on, I just need more. And if we look at like the science behind addiction, and even like because I started my addiction so young, like where my brain development and like a lot of the healing that happens, like it takes a lot of time, you know, for our brain to heal. Like that whole pregnancy and not being on substances, you know, it wasn't long after that I started to like, you know, dabble here and dabble in this. And so it was very like up and down and rocky. Mark got out of prison, you know, like 3 years into Cooper's life. And it was that whole like, we're going to try to be together type of thing. And it was crazy when I think back and I look back at it now because we were both just like so toxic, like the epitome of toxicity. But we did love each other. It was just this very unhealthy love that led to a lot more pain, a lot of chaos, a lot of just really dark times. But now we were doing this with a child. I really like put my son in like a lot of like unsafe places and like had him in very unhealthy situations because I at the time was very unhealthy and I wasn't making good decisions, and my choices were really driven by my need to get better, and the way that I was getting better was like through these substances and through just some of these bad decisions. Would fight with myself about these things all the time because I felt so much shame, because at the end of the day, like, I've always known I really wanted to be a great mom, and having Coop was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. And I just love that kid so much. And so every time I would look at him, it was like I was failing him, but I didn't know how to not fail him because I didn't know how to do anything other than what I was doing. And then you're like coping with that, And so when I share with people what it felt like for me, it was like I was digging my own grave and my hands were glued to the shovel and I didn't know how to put it down. I would talk about and want a different life, but I didn't know how to get there. And then I had so much shame and I had so much guilt and I wasn't willing to be honest. Secrets keep you sick, and I hid in my darkness for a really long time, and you cannot experience light when you're held in darkness. And so for me, that darkness was just so heavy and it was just so overbearing. And that's why I say, by the grace of God, there go I, because to be honest, even in the midst of that, I feel that God has always protected me. When I look at some of the situations I've been in, think to myself, like, literally, I could be dead, right? I could be dead. I could be in prison. Like, there's so many other ways that this could have ended. And so I'm super grateful that it didn't, and that I had the opportunity to rewrite my story and take a lot of that pain and change it and turn it around and heal, and just watch how God, like, not only healed myself, healed Mark, healed our children, how he's still like interweaving and coming through and just restoring so much of what was lost. But he's also taking what was lost and he's making it relevant for us today. And it's our story of strength today, which is really amazing. But him and I, when we tried to get back together, it was chaotic. I too, was in and out of jail, never went to prison, thank God. This last time, right before I came into recovery, though, I was looking at a prison sentence. I kind of had just completely was at the bottom of the bottom, lost it mentally too. It was the worst mental space that I've ever been in my life. I was extremely suicidal. And when I wasn't suicidal, I was making decisions that were going to kill me. And so that's kind of like the trajectory of how that went. It got to the point where I could not take care of my son anymore. And so, DFACS, child welfare, got involved and my son was removed from my custody. For me, one of the biggest turning points in terms of my despair, because I always said, I'm going to get it together for Coop, and Coop was always my hope. And so when he was removed from my custody, I just fell apart. I mean, I literally completely fell apart. I wanted to take my life, and I just remember crying out to God and just being like, I don't know, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I don't think I can go on anymore. And so it wasn't long after that I was arrested. I think it was 3 days later. And for me, that incarceration was really a divine intervention when I look back, because I, again, didn't know how to stop, and that kind of stopped me in my tracks. I was super grateful though, because God definitely put angels, I call them these earth angels, in my path, and one of them was a probation officer, and she just, I don't know, she just cared about me, and I at that point didn't feel cared for. And so when she talked to me like a human, it's just so weird, because it's the most simplest thing. And so I tell people kindness is free, and it's probably the greatest gift that you can give someone, because this lady was kind to me, and I didn't deserve kindness, and I didn't feel like I was worthy of kindness. And oftentimes I showed up into her office high as a kite with drugs in my bra. I would drive there and I have no license, okay, and I would scoot out the passenger side thinking I was slick or something. And she could literally violate me at any point, but she would just have a conversation with me and ask me how I was doing, and just look into me. And when she would look at me, it just felt like she was looking into my soul. But she's actually a huge part of the reason that I went to treatment when I did. And so when I got arrested, because I had charges in another state and I had fled from that state, they really wanted to extradite me, and they wanted me to do time up to 3 years. And so I lost my son. I was living homeless. I had lost everything. I had nothing left to live for. And I had no hope, no hope. So that last cry for help was just God, you need to do something. And he did, and he responded. I didn't know he was going to respond with handcuffs, but today I'm grateful for that, because that opened the door for me to get help. And that's what this kind probation officer had a conversation with me in the courtroom. And she looked at me and she said, Kayla, if I could take these handcuffs off of you right now, what would you do? Where would you go? And I just sat there and I cried, and I had tears rolling down my face, because I knew in that moment that I had nowhere to go. And if she took those handcuffs off of me, I was going to go right back to the hell that I just got pulled off of. And so that's when she told me that she had been looking at treatment centers, and she said, but I need you to be able to make this decision. She's like, you're not a bad person. You just need help. And so she said, but you have to make that decision for yourself. And so she really, like, in that moment empowered me, and she gave me choice, because the reality was the handcuffs weren't coming off of me. I wasn't going to have my freedom and all of these things, but she wanted me to make the decision to be able to get help, because she knew the power in me making that decision. And so I did. And that changed everything for me. Going to treatment was, I went to a treatment center in Tennessee, and it was like I was on a bond condition, and I got to really experience healing for the first time. And it was phenomenal. I had the most incredible therapists. I had 2 therapists. Both of them worked really hard with me. They were not sure if they were gonna be able to get to me, because when I was very difficult. I was not an easy patient, okay? And I know that because I just was so hurt, and I was so angry, and I just really didn't trust anyone at this point. But they just kept working with me. They kept loving me. They kept meeting me where I was at. And essentially I opened up, and I was able to work through a lot of my trauma. I was able to meet a lot of amazing people. I was able to see hope for the first time. I was able to hear strong recovery stories where I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe you're sharing parts of my story. All of these things were happening, and it was so phenomenal. And in that time, I was putting a lot of work into my recovery. And that's where my life just started changing. And I just was seeing so many miracles that God was doing, and he was just opening so many doors for me. And it was just so amazing. And I just felt so cared for and so loved. And I finally felt like, okay, I can do this. Like, I want to live, and I want to work at this, and I want to be in recovery. But I also was facing a lot during that time, because I was fighting a custody battle, a court case. I was still potentially going to prison. It was all of these things that were up in the air for me. And so there were moments where I doubted, and there was moments where I felt like, is I going to be able to do this? And what if I do all of this and then I still have to go to prison and I don't get Cooper back? And this is where I think God really worked on my heart, because I had to really trust in him and not the outcome, and then want to really be able to do these things because they were the right things to do, not because of like what I was going to gain. And so I had this incredible experience with God, just kind of like going back and forth. I always tell people my prayer life used to be a lot of curse words, a lot of yelling, and a lot of like, why, And so thank God that God says, come as you are, because I was a wreck, and he just like took me in and loved me and taught me. And it's just been such an incredible experience. But as I was looking at going to prison and the custody stuff with Cooper, I remember I was on a walk, and earlier in treatment, I was really frustrated with God, and I was like, I don't really I always believed in God, but I don't really think you love me. I don't really think you care. I don't really know. It was just this idea, and I didn't really have the relationship that I have now. But I told him, I was like, if you're real, you can hear me, show me a deer, when I was out in the woods. And of course, no deer appeared, and I'm just looking in the woods, and I'm just okay, whatever. So my whole stay in treatment, which was 4.5 months, I would always be looking for this deer. Never saw my deer. But my life was changing, okay? And I could definitely feel the presence of God. When I got out of treatment and I was in halfway, and I was going to have to turn myself back into jail, it was 2 weeks before I had to turn myself back in. Obviously, when I go to jail and if I'm going to prison, then I'm not going to get custody back, because I'm not going to be able to take care of my son. So I went on a run one day, because I started running. I was trying to get healthy. Recovery for me became about body, mind, and spirit, just really fully trying to get myself better. So I'd go on these runs, and during these runs, I would pray and I would argue with God. And so on this particular run, I was arguing with God about everything going on, about how scared I was, and about what if I don't get to be Cooper's mom. And I just remember this moment where I felt just this warmth come over me, and it's such an indescribable experience. I don't even have words, but I felt the presence of God. And I stopped, and I just started to cry. And in that moment, I felt my heart surrendering, because I just started to say, God, you know what's best. You know the outcome, whether I have to go to jail or not, I'm gonna help people if I have to go to jail. Whether I don't get Cooper back, I'm gonna be ready when he's 18 and he comes looking for me. I just started to kind of profess that I trust the process, and no matter what, I'm gonna do this thing. I'm gonna stay in recovery. I'm going to work hard. I want to help people. And I started to just like cry, let out like all of these feelings. I felt that God was with me in that moment. And so as I was like crying and letting out these feelings, I looked up and literally 10 feet in front of me was a family of deer. I literally was on my knees and I was there for like 15 minutes, and it was such a miracle experience for me. And it was more so about in that moment, I knew God had heard every prayer. He has seen every tear. He loves me, and he's going to be with me through all of it, through the storm, through the darkness, through the hard times. And I just trusted not in the outcome, but in the one who just knows it all, right? The one that's been taking care of me this whole time. And I was like, he's going to take care of her just like he's taking care of me. And so it was just like this moment of clarity for me that like my faith has to be bigger than my circumstances. And I've always held that my whole like journey of recovery. And I've been in recovery for almost 9 years. It'll be 9 years in August. It was the day I got out of jail. And I've just always held on to that. My faith will always be bigger than my circumstances. So it's funny when you had that quote, because it was like talking about your darkness and always being able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And that's been my journey. And even in recovery, I've gone through so many trials. And in the midst of those trials, God has always been present. And the outcome for me has always been like growth, right? And it's shaped my character. It's shaped my level of compassion, my ability to work with all kinds of people, because the pain that I've experienced and the suffering and things that it's inevitable, right? We're all going to go through different things. I've been able to allow those things to shape me in a better way so that I can be there and support other people when they're going through really hard things, because it's really hard to find hope when you're in the midst of darkness and you don't have somebody to share their light or help you light your candle and the light within you. So that's kind of been that process. But the beautiful thing in all of that was a couple weeks later, my probation officer had called me and she said that they were dismissing all my charges in South Carolina. And a few weeks after that, I got custody back of Cooper. So it was an amazing outcome that happened. But I think that God was after my heart before then. And so I always am reminded that no matter what, I just have to trust him. And so my journey of recovery has been so incredible. It's been a journey of growth. It's been messy. It's been work, a lot of work. You know, you continue to work. It's ongoing, which is exciting. I embrace that today because I think that even in our difficulties, that's really what enables new growth. So I'm always like, okay, I'm up for it. And today I get to watch the light bulb come off in other people. I get to share my experience, strength, and hope. I get to hear stories of inspiration and strength in others that just like light my fire. I get to work alongside like some incredible recovery warriors. I have an amazing team and it's just awesome. It just keeps getting better. And the other blessing in my story is oftentimes families are completely ripped apart due to the disease of addiction or mental health challenges or even just family dysfunction, right? And a lack of forgiveness, because a lot of my healing journey was possible because of forgiveness, and forgiveness for myself, forgiveness for others, forgiveness that was a gift to me from God. And so I always tell people the greatest degree you're going to get is a PhD in you. The self-awareness and like continuing to like work on yourself is the greatest investment. And when you realize how awesome it is to invest in yourself, then you'll realize how awesome it is to then invest in others. But you can't impart what you don't possess, so you got to work on you first. And that's really like my motto with things. And being able to like be a mom, being able to now be a wife, being able to be all of these amazing things wouldn't be possible if I didn't first work on me. And so today our family is just awesome. We are a family in recovery. I do believe families recover together. And Mark, who is now going to be my husband in October, he has had his journey and a lot of like incarceration and challenges with addiction and different types of things, but through recovery and through Christ, like he has been changed and has been changing, and he's doing so good, and he's been a dad, and he's such an incredible partner, and we are building together, and we have a business. We've been able to buy a home. We are able to be there present for our children. We're able to be there for other people, and it's just like so awesome. And I just, when I think about like our lives and just where we're at today, I'm just in awe. And it's just like that, the biggest message is that there's hope for anyone and everyone. And that's really the message that I carry today.
Yeah. Wow, girl. What an amazing, amazing story. I mean, it's interesting because while we have friends in common, this is my first time meeting you, and you present with extreme poise. You're absolutely beautiful. To be honest with you, you're like a beauty queen to me. And so you would never know, looking at you, what you've gone through. You would never know that looking at you, and that was your story. Your story got me. I was tearing up. I've been crying a lot lately on these episodes. My shell is breaking. But in two parts of your story, when your probation officer spoke to you in court that day and empowered you, hell yeah.
Yeah.
I need to replicate her and put her into all of these jails and courts all over the world. She is a baddie. I would love to meet her and thank her for what she's done for you. And I'm sure so many other people. And then the other part of your story, obviously, is the deer showing up on God's timing, of course. I had a similar, not same type of story as you, but spiritual awakening. God is a huge part of my story. He was not a part of my story beforehand in active addiction. And then he is a huge part of my recovery. I joke that the day I fell to my knees as well and begged for him to save me, that he slapped me across my face. But yeah, he woke me up that day. And my foundation is through my belief in God and in Jesus. So anyway, I wanted to ask you some follow-up questions.
Yeah.
I have a lot. So one is, I feel like when you were telling your story, you had to grow up really fast. Like you were like ready to go because of what was going on in your family life. Do you feel like maybe you suffered a little bit from some hyper independence?
For sure. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I think honestly, like I'm a very independent person regardless. Like I have a very strong personality too. So like even in recovery and in myself, like maturing as like a woman and a wife and like all of these things, I have to learn sometimes to like set that aside and say like, oh, I can lean into my partner. Okay. Oh, I don't have to do like all of these things, because I think for me also with all of the way that my adolescence was, I thought everything is put on my back. I have to carry these things out. And so it's helped me in certain areas because I am a go-getter. I'm a hustler. I know how to get stuff done, and I will grind it out and figure a way. But in other areas, it has hindered me from trusting in other people to care for me. So I will typically be the strong friend and have a hard time being the one that needs help.
That's very, very relatable. I track with everything that you're saying. So if I'm doing the math right, it sounds like you got your son back, who sounds adorable, by the way. I love his name. When he was 5, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So does he have any memory at all of not being with you?
Yes, he does. So there's certain memories that he doesn't have. So like I have memories of all the things that obviously I feel like could have been traumatic in his life, because when I got into recovery and I realized how much trauma I had been through and all the traumas, I was like, oh my God. And I was freaking out because I was like, my son's going to be destined for the same destiny. And so as I was healing, I was like, I need to get him into therapy. And like when I got him into therapy, I like divulged everything with the therapist. I was like, please, I just, I don't want him to have like be impacted. I don't want this to show up in his life. So what's awesome is that like kids are so resilient, and when you get on like the preventative side and you like intervene early, like you can change the trajectory of a child's life. And as I was getting healthy, all the tools and the things that I was learning, guess what? I'm modeling all of that for him. I'm teaching him those things. A lot of the stuff that I was learning, I was doing with him. So like when I'm trying to build my self-esteem and I'm doing all these affirmations, guess what we're doing? We have affirmations blasted in the car and we're doing them together, right? So when I'm meditating, like all of this stuff, it was cool because like he's like, I always tell people like Cooper raised me, which is like a sucky thing for a kid, but it's like when we look at our story, we grew up together, and I really didn't start like changing my whole idea on parenting until I came into recovery, and I actually like learned how to be a parent because I learned how to be a person, like a healthy person. And so through like a lot of therapy and through just like me and him have just such good conversations and we have such a strong relationship, I've always worked through things with him. And he'll share with me, like, I remember when you were in jail and I came and seen you. And I remember when he remembers like when I wasn't with him. All of those are memories there. But because he's older now, because he's 14 now, but I've always been very open with him. And I've had like really beautiful moments where I've gotten to like apologize to him and just sit with him and tell him just how much I love him and explain to him certain things. So he has a beautiful way of viewing people and the world because he's gotten to watch his mom and dad go through some really dark stuff and come out the other side. And I've always just been super open in my communication with him because it's important for him to know too, because obviously he's at risk. And if he doesn't work through his stuff, when those things come up, then any of us can be at risk of, going down the wrong path.
Yeah. So, if you look at the stats, someone with what happened to you, the incarcerations, the multiple substances, the stats are against you, right? To get out and live this life that you have now. So what do you think kept you sober in that first year? Because really it's that first year where people will slip back into their old ways.
Yeah, a lot of things. There was a lot of components. My biggest motivator was Cooper at the time, but that it wasn't just him that kept me sober. It was really the fact that it was building a support network, right? And so having community of other people with lived experience in recovery was super important. Being able to start talking about my struggles, that was an important aspect. I do believe like secrets keep you sick. When we put things in the dark and we're not willing to share our pain or walk through some of the thought processes that we have with somebody safe, typically that's moving us more towards wanting to cover this up, feeling a certain way about it, and then we get into old behaviors and tendencies. I was willing to do whatever it took because I knew I was going to die. And so I think I had to just have that like real heart to heart of like, if I don't do these things and just try this out, that life that I had over there, like I don't want that, but I will end up going back to that. I think that when you're ready, you're like just willing to go all in, and I was all in on my addiction. I was all in on my toxic relationships. Like I'm a girl that knows how to go all in. And so even today in recovery, I go all in, but I go all in on like good things, and that produces good outcomes.
Yeah, I'm an all-in girly myself.
Yeah.
Which is why, like, to kind of bring it back, like, even with like food, like, I've been on this crazy health journey these last few years, and people are like, why don't you even just have a bite of cake? I'm like, you don't understand. I can't, because I will eat the entire cake, I'm like that with everything. I wanted to ask you about your job. Your job sounds awesome. When did you start working for this recovery center, and what's your role there?
Oh, funny enough, I always say this is another God thing, because when I was in treatment and I was having all of these spiritual awakenings and these breakthroughs, I one day was just crying and I was like, God, I want to spend the rest of my life helping people experience the same freedom. I want people to know hope. I want them to know there's another life out there. I want to love people and help them on this journey of recovery. I didn't know what that was going to mean and where that was going to take me, but that was a prayer that I had. And when I got custody back of Cooper, part of the stipulations was, first of all, I never wanted to come back to Florida. So that was the one thing that I told my therapist. I told everyone that was involved. And to be honest with you, my family, my mom came through when I was like at my worst. Like if it wasn't for my family support, I also wouldn't be here today. So they're like a really huge component of it, because my mom, she was living in Florida at the time, but when she actually saw like how bad I was doing, she like flew to Georgia, like went to like a dangerous place to find me, like in the, hole of a trap house type ordeal, and like was like, I have to get my daughter help. And so I'm so grateful for her, because she never gave up on me, and she was a huge component of my story. And so when I was getting custody back of Cooper, I needed to have a stable house, right? And so these were not things that I had, because going into it, I was homeless and lost everything and didn't have things. So what ended up happening was I could only get custody back of Cooper if I moved in with my mom in Florida. And so I remember like hysterical crying in my therapist's office being like, I have to go back to Florida, because God blocked like I was like, I'll move to Tennessee, I'll move back to Georgia. I was making all of these plans and God blocked every single avenue except for Florida. So I was so upset. But I also knew that this was what was going to happen, and this is probably what needed to happen. Now I know why. It was the best decision that ever happened, because I moved back to Florida and I moved in with my mom. And when I tell you, that restored so much of our relationship, and like it has been like the most beautiful gift in recovery, because we did not have a good relationship throughout my adolescence. I wouldn't talk to her. I pushed everyone away. And so that's been a gift. Being in Florida led me to meeting the CEO of South Florida Wellness Network, which is a recovery community organization in Florida, in Broward and Miami-Dade County. And I actually had an opportunity to meet the CEO because my mom was friends with someone who worked at the Department of Children and Families, who followed my story and was so inspired by like my recovery journey. And she knew like the ins and outs of like my story, that she wanted me to work in a peer specialist role. But peers were so new at the time that people didn't know how to interview for them, because we were talking people with lived experience and they're in these like different types of positions. And so the lady, my mom's friend, had asked the CEO of this nonprofit to come interview me for a peer role at the Department of Children and Families, which is like basically like in Georgia, it's called DFACS. Here it's DCF. It's like the child welfare system, and a lot of like, they oversee a lot of like the treatment program and stuff like that. So when I met Susan, I ended up just sharing my life story with her, and we cried, and it was like the most craziest interview ever because I've never been interviewed on my history and my story to be what somebody wanted to see for me to obtain a job. Anyways, that ended up leading me to, instead of getting the job at DCF, to actually going and getting around Susan and her nonprofit and just really volunteering and showing up. And we were really small at the time, which is so crazy because we've grown so much. And this was almost 8 years ago. And I loved it because it was so different. It was this role that was based off of like your lived experience, and the impact that I saw was just so like tremendous. And I was getting around like other people in recovery that had like very similar passion as me to like want to help people. We would go and speak to police officers so that they understood when they were coming across like a crisis, like how, like would be like the best way to approach. And it ended up landing me a job. And which I was so excited about because I was going to be working in child welfare with parents that were endangered of losing their children due to addiction. And obviously I had just gone through this whole experience with my son. And so I began in that program. So I've done child welfare system. I've worked in the jail system. Because my lived experience crosses over so many systems, I got to do a lot of work one-on-one with individuals. And it was just the most epic dream job of my life.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be absolutely phenomenal at your job because of your lived experience. If you hadn't have gone through all of that, incarceration, all of it, it would be hard to relate to these people and to get on their level. I automatically trust someone when they're in recovery themselves,
Yeah.
So I think, all of that lived experience was to serve this purpose. So that's a really beautiful part of your story. I have one more question before we go to the lightning round. I need to know how you and Mark got back together.
Okay. So we started to talk because he reached out about Cooper. Okay. And when he reached out about Cooper, and the moment that I knew that he was really doing something different was because the conversation was different. It wasn't so selfish. So he started to just talk differently. And I knew, okay, there's change happening here. And he told me the things that he was doing for his recovery. And I was so excited for him. And so I started to build a friendship with him. When we started to co-parent again, I wanted to give it some time just to see where he was going to be at. And he was pretty consistent with everything. And so him and Cooper were able to start talking on the phone and just reintroducing that. And my son has always wanted his father. And one thing I always did was never speak ill of like what was going on, because one, I know firsthand, like, hello, like I'm, like it's a miracle that I'm even able to be here. And I always knew like Mark loved his children. Like he loves his children. It's just that he had struggled and had not yet gotten into recovery. He had not yet like made that decision and like had that opportunity to really change his whole life around. I mean, he might have had opportunities, but he had never yet like really surrendered. And so when I started to see that surrender, I started to see like just all the amazing things about him. And so we built an amazing friendship, and we were co-parenting. We were not together, nor were we thinking about getting together. And I would come up to Georgia because I love Rabun County. It's still like my most beautiful place. I took it so much for granted when I was in my addiction and in that darkness. But today, when I'm up there, it's just so amazing, and I'm so happy when I'm up there. But anyways, so I would take Cooper up, and we would go up like a couple times a year. And I started to let him stay with his dad like for spring break. And so every time we would go up though, we would go out to dinner together with the kids, and our lives were so paralleled. It's been like almost 3 years now that I went up there for another Easter, and because I would go up during certain times, and I was up there with my best friend, and my best friend knows because when we would get around each other, she's like, gosh, I can feel it. Like there's just this thing. And I would tell her, I'm like, it's so crazy that I don't want to feel this way. I don't know why these feelings are still so strong. And I'm able to set that to the side, because the most important thing to me was just like, he's healthy parenting, recovery. I'm happy. I'm good. And I'd gotten so happy with myself that I was like, I could be alone for the rest of my life. I finally am whole. And when you are whole, like it's just so different. And God just filled every like missing piece in me that I felt ever was missing. So there goes my like hyper independence, right? But when I came up, the feelings were so strong. And so I knew that he had feelings for me, but I had told him a couple years prior that was not going to happen, and we just needed to be co-parenting. And so I messaged him, and I just told him, and I was like, I have these feelings that I don't know if you feel them too, but they've never gone away. I've always loved you. I think I'm always going to love you. And we were actually going to be going on a hike with Cooper, because when we would go up, we would do things together and just co-parent. And we went on this hike and I was like, oh my goodness, I love him. I love him still. And so when we were messaging back and forth, Cooper went with his Nana and Papa, and me and Mark, we met up, and it just was like, I don't know, it was like history from there. We were in love with each other. But what we did do was we said that we didn't want to cause harm to our family. And because we knew that this had to be different and our recovery and being a parent was more important, we decided we were going to pray about it. And so I went back to Florida and he was in Georgia and we prayed about it. And through prayer, I felt and he felt like we both got the same message of the go ahead. We didn't tell the kids and we were dating each other. We were like redating in recovery, which was super cool. So we would go hiking because that's like my favorite thing to do is see waterfalls. And from there, it just like kind of built. And this time, the difference was the foundation was on Christ. And so God had just really been in the midst of all of it. And so our relationship this time, it was like we got to redate, but the healthiest versions of ourselves, which was super cool because then when we brought the kids in, everything, the transition of all of that was like a beautiful thing. And it was a happily ever after for our family that it wasn't like waiting for the other shoe to drop kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I love that. I love that story so much. It's just like evolving in such a beautiful trajectory, you know? And I love how you brought up Rabun County. I have traveled all over the world, but to this day, Rabun County is the most beautiful place I've ever been. And if you've lived there, you get it. You know about the special, unique quality that county has. It's God's country, honestly.
It is. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love it. It's my favorite place.
Me too, girl. So we have made it to the lightning round of our show. These are fun get to know you questions at the end of our episode. So the very first question is you're given 3 options. You have to pick one. You have to either shark dive, bungee jump, or skydive. Which one are you choosing?
I mean, I would do all 3, but I guess I've been talking a lot about skydiving, so skydive.
Okay, good answer. Number 2, you're in a simulation. Every time you walk into a room, the same song plays. What's your song?
Goodness of God.
I love that song. That's my favorite song. Oh my God. I had a patient tell me about that song, but she was like, you have to listen to the CC Winans. It will change your life. And it's literally my number 1 favorite song on my playlist.
Oh my God, yes. That song
And
means so much to me.
I am obsessed with that song. Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Okay, number 3. What is your favorite Disney movie?
Ooh, Mulan, hands down. I love
Okay.
Mulan. Hyper
Love
independent
it.
woman, you
Yeah.
know?
With some armor. Yeah. That's hilarious. That's an oldie. That's a goodie.
It is, I know. But I know like the whole like lyrics. I always want to sing is like, let's get down to business, you know, like
That could be your other simulation song.
yeah, yeah.
I love it. Number 4, what is something you're obsessed with?
My family. Yeah. Right now, I think I'm in my family era of just really enjoying all that God has done and creating memories and moments. And so I love travel and I love being outside. And so, but I love doing all those things with my family.
It's beautiful. Last question. What does freedom mean to you?
Oh boy. Wow. Gosh, that's a loaded question. Gosh, today it's like, it's so much more than just like not using drugs. When I think about the progression of freedom in my life today, it's like, I know who I am in Christ. I know where I'm going. I know what my mission is. And I just feel free in all ways, you know, like everything. I have, not that I'm not going to go through challenges in life because we all are, but I just feel this sense of freedom in the sense that nothing holds me down and like I'm not in bondage anymore. There's no chains over me. When I go through something, I know I'm going to grow through something. I'm no longer afraid like when there's like something difficult to speak about. Like I know that like shame kills us. So I'm very like, you know, I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to work through it. It's the same thing I tell like my kids and Mark is like, we're going to get through whatever it is in life, but we have to walk in freedom, walk in the light. And by that, sometimes we have to like step into truth, step into courage. So today, like freedom for me is just freedom to be who I am, to show up as fully as myself. And you know, whatever that brings.
That was a beautiful, beautiful answer. So much. You know, it's so interesting because me and you have very different stories, but I feel extremely connected to you. And I think, as humans, we connect through the suffering. We connect through these type of relationships. So I can't thank you enough for coming on. It truly was an honor. You're going to do great things. I see the fire in you. I know you're going to go out and just change the world. So thank you again for sharing your story with my listeners.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate you too. And I feel very connected.
Yes. All right, girl. Bye.
Bye.